Um, Good morning and good evening, everyone. My name is Shalu Agrawal. I work as a senior program lead with the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water. CEEW is one of Asia's leading policy research institutions. We use data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. We work across 7 different focus areas and one center for energy finance. Our work spans um, issues of today, which include those of energy access, including increasing renewables penetration in the grid mix, power sector reforms, but also those of the transition pertaining to industrial sustainability and competitiveness, low carbon pathways, as well as the risk and adaptation issues related to climate change, which includes here and now issues of air quality, but as well as the transition challenges of food systems, technology, finance, and trade, and also thinking about the investment needed to mobilize finance for the transition. Um, Today, I'll be talking about the impact of COVID on energy systems and the policy responses. And this is a topic that is not a new one. A lot has been said about the pandemic, its impact on lives and livelihoods, as well as on the energy systems. But what is more important to discuss is whether and how this once in lifetime shock of global scale has altered our present and future outlook, and why the community needs to actively absorb lessons from this tryst of ours and work towards creating a safe and sustainable future for us. During the next 25 minutes or so, I would reflect on the major changes that the COVID-19 pandemic brought in our lives and its implications for the global and national energy systems. I would like to draw a distinction between, the short and acute problems that surfaced last year and the chronic and the systemic vulnerabilities that the pandemic exposed. I would also reflect on the key lessons that we all can take from it and what should be our future approach, decisions concerning energy systems. And as my work mainly at the council mainly revolves around, the energy transition, particularly power sector reforms in the country, I will draw heavily from the experience in India and the examples thereof, which also represents 1/6 of the humanity. So let's begin. And post the detection of the virus in Wuhan, China, the governments across the world resorted to lockdowns at various scales, which impacted fundamentally the way people move, work, or consume goods and services. Right? We all have heard of how there was an unprecedented drop in mobility. A record 50 to 70% drop in road transport was observed during the lockdowns across countries. Air transport came to a screeching halt in many regions. And this limited commute gave rise to a major trend of working from home, and across countries noticed a 10 to 50% rise in teleworking, depending upon the severity of the lockdown as well as the makeup of the economy. And of course, as one would expect, the trends for teleworking were much higher among the qualified workers. And as a corollary, while this is applicable more for workers in the knowledge economy, those who were in more personal services industry or unorganized sector actually lost their jobs. But at the same time, there was a visible drop in consumption and production activities across the global economy, which saw a contraction of 4.3%. And of course, there was a much severe contraction in countries like India, Italy, and Spain, which were hard hit by the pandemic and saw pretty strict lockdowns. But I mean, all in all, of course, this was how our lives got affected. But given that our lives are sort of centered around the use of energy, there was also a historic drop in the global energy demand. And it was basically the slowdown in production and the economic activities, as well as people's movement, which led to almost a 3.8% drop in global energy demand, during the first quarter of 2020 as compared to the same period a year before. But overall, when we look at, the whole year, noticeable drop, in global energy demand was there, which was almost 6%, which is equivalent to India's annual energy demand, which is what's third biggest energy consumer. So, that's the pace of drop in energy use that was observed. And of course, the steepest decline happened during the lockdowns. And then this, of course, manifested differently across countries. There was almost a 25% average decline per week in countries with full lockdown. India alone saw a decline of 30%, during the national lockdown, whereas there was 18% average decline in countries with partial lockdown, which varied somewhere from 10% drop in Korea and Japan to 15 to 17% drop in China and Europe. But one of the major fallouts of the pandemic has been on the power sector. The world saw a 20% drop just in global electricity demand due to complete lockdowns. And this figure shows a year-on-year change in weekly power demand for select countries. And you can see that the drop range from 15% to 30%, depending upon the countries. India, for instance, saw power demand drop by 28%, year-on-year basis in the week following the lockdown. These are like major drop, that have not been foreseen in future in such a short span of time. And basically, in India, power demand dropped to a 7-year low. In this economy, which has otherwise been growing at a very fast pace in terms of energy demand. And both the previous graph and this graph shows that across countries, it's quite a while actually to for the power demand to come back to even the previous year's level. Only by August there was sort of a sustained increase in demand. Same was the case in India, where only post August the demand actually exceeded the previous year's level. And much of this rise in demand happened with the rise in, or rather recovery in demand happened with the rise in the industrial and commercial activities. And in India, for instance, we did a subnational analysis to see how the demand changed over time. And we see this graph shows how the demand patterns for select states with high share of industrial and commercial activities in total power consumption. And we can see, that the demand patterns sort of fall, correlate very strongly with the trends of composite purchasing managers index, which is a very good proxy of how the economic activities in the in these states or in the country were improving or recovering. And then of course the rise in industrial and commercial activities in turn was also a result of easing of the lockdowns, as well as surfacing of the pent-up demand just before the festive season in India, which happens around October. Well, it's also well known how the pandemic impacted the renewable sector. The industry saw a significant drop in new solar capacity addition in 2020. Just in India, the drops were of the order of 36% as compared to the previous year, and India has been one of the leading players when it comes to new capacity addition in the solar sector. But at the same time, there were some parallel, and of course, these drop in capacity additions were a result of disruptions in the supply chain, as well as halt in productions. But at the same time, we noticed that there were a lot of parallel and positive market developments. There were discovery of records low solar tariffs. For instance, India discovered 2.36 rupees per kilowatt unit, one of the lowest tariffs in 2020. Many new market entrants won bids, during solar auctions, and governments, of course, responded, to the sector's, issues by extension of commissioning deadlines, and all three trends were witnessed in India as well. But at the same time, the global energy investments, even though they slowed down a little bit during that year, we see that they're estimated to rise by 7% in 2021 over the 2020. In fact, in India, we observed the RE companies raised billions of dollars of debt from overseas. Interestingly, in parallel, we also see, a rise in share of renewable energy in the grid mix across, the country. The drop in demand was accommodated largely by the thermal generation, whereas enforcement of the priority access to the renewables, this combined with the drop in thermal demand to accommodate the drop in demand overall, meant that the share of renewables in the grid mix rose across countries. This graph shows the share of different sources of generation, different power generation sources in the total electricity generation mix for the year 2020. And it can be seen, just before April, when the national lockdown in India was enforced, there was just, there was a drop of around 5.5% in the share of coal power in monthly electricity mix. At the same time, the share of RE in energy electricity mix actually rose by more than 4% in just a span of 1 month. And this is actually a significant deviation from the trends observed in the previous year. And of course, the share of renewables increase seasonally, and that peak sort of happens around the July, August, and September months. However, because of the pandemic, the share of RE in the electricity mix increased much before its usual seasonal trends. And as a result, what we also observed was there was a 2.1% drop in the share of coal in India's total annual power generation in the year 2020 as compared to what would be the expected demand. And this is significant because this is equivalent to almost taking off 5,000 megawatt of coal power generation for a full year off the grid, right? And this does not include the drop in emissions, which happened due to the drop in energy demand, which itself was a substantial 8% of the expected total demand. So, roughly speaking, we almost observed 10% drop in emissions associated with India's power sector in year 2020, which can be very clearly attributed to COVID-19 impact, right? Which means that that year this would have meant lower criteria pollutant emissions as well as better quality of life for the people, quality of air, I mean. And this was definitely one of the major silver lining in the otherwise unfortunate turn of events that we all witnessed. And it also gave people, especially those living in the cities or in the areas closer to the power generating stations, what a cleaner and a sustainable future could mean for us. But beside the silver lining, actually, the demand shock that came with COVID-19 had a major impact or a fallout on the power sector. It exposed utilities, power utilities in particular, to significant liquidity stress, and this chart shows the process for it. Like the lockdowns led to drop in production and commercial activities. That of course led to loss of livelihoods and income, which led to drop in households' paying capacity, and this combined with, of course, the budget constraints that the households were facing. They were unable to pay for their electricity bills in time, which then meant significant revenue loss for power utilities, which led to accumulation of dues, to the power generators, and in turn leading to cascading effects on the banking system. So this whole vicious cycle sort of, came alive during the COVID-19 induced demand shock. And what needs to be noted is that the chronic and the systemic issues that have been afflicting the power sector, they further worsen the financial stress on the utilities. By this, I mean, heavily regulated power market with strong political influence. And many countries, they lack cost-reflective tariffs, and as a result of which, utilities have to rely on cross subsidies, which means, they charge extra tariff on their industrial and commercial consumers to then provide a subsidized tariff to domestic and agricultural and such consumers. And of course, this along with delays in the usual subsidy dispersals because governments across the board were also facing financial constraints, as well as the pre-existing gaps in the billing and collection system. All of this together meant that the utilities, which were already facing drop in demand and loss of revenue, had to face a lot of liquidity crunch. And of course, governments, responded quickly in this aftermath with key policy responses like enhancing liquidity, or infusion to allow utilities to clear the pending dues. There was also, a trend of relaxing borrowing and the payment norms for utilities, but also for the consumers, and along with some temporary tariff cushions. And all of this was helpful, yet concerns abound. For instance, in India alone, there was a rise in gross debt of power utilities by 25% in just 1 year, and then they rose to $82 billion by 2020. This is massive, and these things sort of point towards how there is a need for systemic reforms, and there's a need to adequately study, or rather reflect on what happened during the pandemic and how we should think about designing our energy system going forward. And in fact, in summary, the pandemic has exposed how our energy systems are vulnerable to such massive shocks, which may only become pervasive with the runaway climate change. And moreover, despite the pandemic, global emissions declined only by 6%, 6.4% to be precise, uh, which means that we need to reflect, better on how we're going to achieve the mammoth task of decarbonizing a whole energy system. And we need, therefore, very strong responses to enhance the resilience of our energy systems going forward, right? And that's because the pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities, and that underscores the need for it. And I would like to put forward 5 proposals. The first one being addressing the market distortions, particularly in the power sector, through liberalizing, the power markets, ensuring, phase out of the cross subsidies, as well as leveraging digital tools to enhance efficiency as well as the resilience of the grid. We also need to, go much more ambitious on renewables and energy efficiency, which would require that we create a conducive ecosystem to unlock huge amounts of investments that will be needed to decarbonize our grids as well as energy use across sectors. For instance, just to reach the targets of 450 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2030, India alone will need investments of the order of $500 billion, for new generation capacity, grid expansion, as well as enhancing its flexibility. But even though clean energy investments, are on the rebound to pre-crisis levels, we need more concrete efforts and actions on multiple fronts to ensure that adequate investments, especially for energy markets, emerging markets, and developing economies, are coming through. And then for this, it's important that higher income countries, they rethink their role in financing the transition in low income countries. Otherwise, many of them may run the risk of resorting to cheaper but unclean or locally available, energy intensive or carbon intensive resources like coal. And we must explore, innovative mechanisms here, for instance, subsidized credit enhancement facilities, to make sure that, diverse sources of finance can be tapped. Thirdly, we need to design future-ready power markets, such that they can integrate, millions of distributed energy resources, as well as devices, be it rooftop solar systems, grid interactive battery units, electric vehicles, solar irrigation pumps, or even smart home appliances. And this would really require us to think of, smarter and dynamic tariff designs, come up with advanced forecasting tools that can help us integrate these, multiple prosuming devices with the grid adequately. But let us be very mindful that all of this would need to be supplemented by very meaningful energy safety nets for the consumers. Across countries, the pandemic has enhanced the inequality in income distribution. And even though economic recovery is happening, it is rather uneven, and it's particularly the low-income countries, which are seeing much slower recovery, partly, on the back of slow pace of vaccination as well as renewed outbreaks of virus. Um, and therefore, the impact of the slowdown, the recession, and the slower recovery on the marginalized populations needs to be well understood, which is currently very poorly understood. For instance, in India, despite massive electrification drives and programs to make clean cooking gas available for households, the consumption of these actually suffered post the pandemic. We do not appropriately understand it, but there are enough evidence, to suggest that this is happening. And therefore, support in the form of temporary subsidies on cooking gas or electricity for select households, um, you know, uh, would need to be thought of. And finally, we need to also actively and collectively actually think about what kind of energy system are we designing, what is its larger purpose, and ideally the way it has to be designed to support jobs, growth, and a good quality life for all. Can we rethink the role that energy plays in creating millions of jobs? How can we simultaneously, decarbonize industries as well as leverage them as engines of growth? Our policies have to be well integrated with energy, industrial policies, to make that happen. How can DRE support productive activities in rural areas? For instance, solar-powered food processing activities, textile processing, dairy applications, irrigation, and there are so many such opportunities that could actually, serve the dual purpose of making energy access possible, but at the same time through clean energy sources, which is happening for, productive activities and, increasing community resilience. And how can clean energy be used to bridge the last mile community services like health and education, as well as meet the cooling energy needs of billions of people who may currently, lack it. So these are the questions I think we'll have to answer going forward in a manner that, whatever climate shocks or, such, unforeseen events face the humanity, we are better prepared to deal with it in the coming times. That's from it. That's from my side for today. Thank you so much for listening in. I'm Shalu Agrawal again, and these are my email and Twitter IDs. I'll be happy to answer any questions should you like to. Thank you. We have a question where our guest has asked, what advice would I give to those who want to promote sustainable energy? I would say, this is the best time actually to be excited about promoting sustainable energy, and the avenues for doing so are limitless. I mean, you can, and it depends on your interest. What part of the problem would you like to solve for? You can be supporting. First of all, as a consumer, you can support sustainable energy by adopting, distributed energy, renewable energy resources, and that has become so much more easier today than yesteryear because of the solutions have become affordable. They are easy to use, almost like a plug and play model. Uh, Taking the next step, you can promote the same by becoming an ambassador or local champion in your neighborhoods and communities, as well as your districts or your country or at the global scale. And in the moment you are keen to go bigger in terms of how big an impact you want to have, you can of course work with help to unlock the finance for sustainable energy. You can work towards figuring out what alternative uses could be for sustainable energy. For instance, if you're keen about working in farming and agricultural issues and yet want to see how can sustainable energy help be tapped to promote farming activities as well as related, post-production activities. There is a lot of innovation that is needed that you could work towards, and of course, the people interested in the policy space, we need a lot of innovation to think about how exactly are we going to support integration of large scale renewables with the grid. How are we going to make the grid flexible? So depending upon what your skills, your passion, there is a lot of avenues for everyone to be working in this space. We have another question which asks, what solutions can be implemented in the energy sector to tackle climate action? Uh, well, it's it is the question to answer when the world has been debating about how and when to get to net zero, right? And decarbonizing the energy sector is going to the major plank of achieving um, the net zero and solve for the climate sort of runaway climate situation that we otherwise would be facing. And in terms of solutions, we really have to leverage all avenues possible. It's not a question of whether it's going to be solar or wind or hydro or or other forms of alternative energy, or for that matter, hydrogen. We need all forms of clean energy resources, to the extent possible, and we need to do it as aggressively as possible. Um, and while these are, of course, measures on the supply side, we need a lot of action and focus on the demand side, where we have to, ensure that we are not growing energy demand as fast as we otherwise would have done. Measures such as energy efficiency, behavior change, and lifestyle changes would be fundamentally critical to make sure that we are able to take actions that can keep the world within the 1.5-degree temperature rise target. Thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure, to speak on this very interesting topic. I would let the speaker after me, continue. Thank you again, and this is Shalu.